He had only 9 days to marry and save his fortune, tainted by family secrets. On the 8th day, the virgin, mysterious and silent Nanny made a proposal he never expected to hear. If you like love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave your comment telling us where you're listening from. Let's continue. The December rain in Chicago beat against the bulletproof windows of the Harrison mansion with an insistence that irritated Ethan. He watched the drops run down the glass while adjusting his Italian tie, preparing for another meeting with prospective brides his team had selected. 8 days. That was all he had left to find a wife who would save not only his reputation, but control of the pharmaceutical empire that 3 generations of Harrisons had built with blood, sweat, and well-kept secrets. The reflection in the mirror showed him a 42-year-old man, dark hair with prematurely grey strands at his temples, honey-colored eyes that carried the weight of choices he could never undo. Ethan Harrison was considered one of the country's most coveted bachelors, but also the most dangerous. His last fiancée, Hannah Mitchell, daughter of a traditional Boston family, had been found dead in her own mansion's garden 3 years earlier. The official report spoke of suicide, but the whispers of high society painted a much darker picture. "Mr. Harrison, your 10 o'clock candidate is waiting in the blue room," announced Marcus, his personal assistant, through the intercom. Ethan sighed, taking the last sip of coffee that had gone cold while he reviewed the marriage contracts. Yes, contracts, because in his world, even love needed to be documented, stamped, and signed by witnesses. He descended the Italian marble staircase that echoed his footsteps like gunshots in an empty cathedral. The Harrison mansion was a mausoleum of luxury, with its wide corridors, ancestral paintings, and furniture worth more than entire houses. But that morning, something was different. A subtle scent of jasmine mixed with something he couldn't identify hung in the air. It wasn't the artificial smell of the air fresheners the housekeeper used, nor the expensive perfume of visitors. It was something organic, alive. That's when he saw her for the first time in months. Sophia Richards climbed the stairs carrying little Claire in her arms, the 5-year-old girl whimpering with fever. Sophia was 28, brown hair always tied in a low bun that let some rebellious strands escape, framing a face that could be considered pretty if she bothered to smile. But Sophia didn't smile. Ethan had noticed that. In the 2 years she had been caring for the twins, his sister Valerie's children who died in a car accident, he had never seen her display a genuine smile. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," she murmured, without raising her eyes, continuing her ascent. Claire, however, stretched her little arms toward her uncle, forcing Sophia to stop. "Uncle Ethan, Claire's sick," said Lucas, her twin brother appearing at the top of the stairs with messy hair and still in his pajamas. "She cried all night." Ethan approached and touched the girl's forehead, feeling the hot skin against his palm. For an instant, his fingers brushed Sophia's as she adjusted Claire in her arms. The contact was brief, but enough for him to notice how she stiffened, as if his touch were poisonous. The reaction both intrigued and irritated him. "I'll call the pediatrician," he said, taking his cell phone from his pocket. "I already called, sir." "He's coming at 2 o'clock, replied Sophia with her always controlled voice, never too loud, never too soft. "Excuse me." And she continued climbing, leaving him standing there with the jasmine scent still in his nostrils and a strange feeling in his chest. Ethan shook his head, annoyed with himself. He had no time for daydreams. He had a marriage to arrange in 8 days. The meeting with the 10 o'clock candidate was a disaster. Roberta Silverstein, daughter of a federal congressman, spent 40 minutes talking about her European travels and her plans to redecorate the mansion once they were married. Ethan dismissed her before she even finished describing how she would transform the library into a closet. The 2 o'clock candidate wasn't any better. Anna Benson, heiress to a hotel chain, arrived accompanied by a personal photographer and suggested they do a pre-wedding photo shoot for social media. Ethan dismissed her in the hallway. At 4 o'clock, when he was supposed to receive the day's 3rd candidate, he locked himself in the library. It had been his refuge since childhood, a place where he could hide from his parents, tutors, and the responsibilities that had weighed on his shoulders since he learned to walk. The bookshelves went from floor to ceiling, filled with first editions and rare books his grandfather had collected. Ethan poured himself a 20-year-old Scotch whiskey and threw himself into the leather armchair that creaked under his weight. That's when he heard Sophia's soft voice outside the door, talking to Claire. "Let's see if Uncle Ethan is in the library, sweetheart. You said you wanted to show him your drawing." The door opened slowly and Claire ran in, her cheeks still flushed from the fever that had subsided after medication. Sophia followed her, stopping at the threshold when she realized he was holding a glass of whiskey and that his eyes were red with fatigue. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison. Claire insisted on—" she began. "Uncle Ethan, look what I drew," interrupted the girl, climbing onto the armchair and nestling beside her uncle. She held out a sheet of paper with a colorful drawing of a house surrounded by flowers. "It's our house, but with pretty flowers in the garden." Sophia said flowers make everything happier. Ethan examined the drawing, then looked at Sophia, who remained at the door, hands clasped in front of her body, waiting to retrieve the girl. For a moment, their eyes met, and he saw something there he had never noticed before. A deep, old sadness that she carried just as he carried the guilt for Hannah's death. "It's a very beautiful drawing, Claire," he said, kissing the top of the girl's head. "How about we ask the gardener to plant some flowers tomorrow?" "Really?" Claire clapped her hands, excited. "Really?" he confirmed, not taking his eyes off Sophia. For the first time in 2 years, he saw her sketch something that could be a smile. That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. Lying in her simple bed in the back room of the mansion, she turned over in her mind the moment when her eyes met Ethan's in the library. There was something different in that look, an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see through the layers of protection she had built over the years. Since childhood, Sophia had known she was different. While other children complained about loud noises or bright lights, she suffered from the smells that emanated from people's emotions. She discovered at 8, when her mother died of cancer, that sadness smelled like old rain, sticky and sour. Despair smelled like rusted iron. Anger had the acrid odor of vinegar mixed with gunpowder. It was a neurologist at a public hospital who named her condition emotional synesthesia. "It's rare," the doctor had said, "but it's not a disease. It's almost a superpower if you learn to deal with it." Sophia was never sure if it was a superpower or a curse, especially when her father began showing the first symptoms of schizophrenia, and she could smell his madness before he even knew he was losing his mind. The smell of madness was the worst of all, a mixture of mold with something sweet and rotten, like fruit decaying in a damp basement. It was this same smell she sometimes felt in the corridors of the Harrison mansion whenever she passed near the locked attic on the 3rd floor. She got up from bed and walked to the window that overlooked the garden. The full moon illuminated the rose bushes Valerie had planted before she died, which now grew wild without the care of a professional gardener. Ethan had dismissed all external staff after Hannah's death, keeping only the trusted internal team. Herself, the housekeeper, Mrs. Carter, the driver, John, the night security guard, and 2 housekeepers who came during the day. That's when she saw a light on the 3rd floor, the attic. Sophia frowned. "Mrs. Sophia." Carter always said that room had been off limits since Hannah's accident, and that not even she had the keys, but there was a faint yellowish light, like from a candle or oil lamp. The clock read 2:15 in the morning. The children were sleeping deeply after Claire's fever medication. Sophia put on her robe and left the room, walking through the silent corridors of the mansion. Her bare feet made no sound on the cold marble floor. She climbed to the 2nd floor where the main bedrooms were. Ethan's bedroom door was ajar, and she could see the bed was empty, the covers thrown aside as if he had left in a hurry. She continued up to the 3rd floor where the staircase ended in a narrow corridor with only one door at the end. The attic door was open. Sophia hesitated. She knew she shouldn't be there, that she was invading Ethan's privacy in an unforgivable way. But something pulled her forward, an urgent need to understand what was happening in that house, what mysteries hid behind those marble walls and silence. She climbed the last steps and peeked through the half-open door. The attic was smaller than she imagined, but carefully organized. There were stacked boxes, furniture covered with white sheets, and on a table in the center of the room, dozens of lit candles illuminated a collection of personal objects, jewelry, photographs, letters yellowed by time. Ethan sat in a chair before the table, his back to the door. He was shirtless, and Sophia could see the scars that marked his back, thin old lines that seemed to have been made by a whip or belt. He was holding something in his hands, a photograph, from what she could see, and murmuring words she couldn't distinguish. That's when the smell hit her with full force. It wasn't just sadness or guilt. It was something much more complex. Remorse mixed with obsession, love turned to poison, desire that had become self-destruction. The smell was of burnt wood and dead flowers, sweet and bitter at the same time, making her feel nauseated. Ethan turned abruptly, as if he had sensed her presence. Their eyes met through the dimness, and for a moment, neither moved. He was holding the photograph of Hannah Mitchell, the dead fiancée. A smiling Hannah dressed in white, posing next to Ethan at some social event. "You shouldn't be here," he said in a hoarse voice, but without anger. Just infinite sadness. "I'm sorry," murmured Sophia, taking a step back. "I saw the light and thought it might be a fire." Ethan placed the photograph back on the table and rose slowly. Sophia noticed he was shaking slightly, and that there was an almost empty bottle of whiskey next to the candles. "You lied," he said, approaching her. "You can feel it, can't you, what I'm feeling?" Sophia stiffened. No one had ever discovered her secret, not even her father, in his last moments of lucidity before his final commitment. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, but her voice came out trembling. "Hannah could too," continued Ethan, coming closer. "She said I smelled like a storm even before the clouds formed, that my anger smelled like wet gunpowder, that my love for her smelled like—" He stopped, studying Sophia's face. "What do I smell like now?" Sophia swallowed hard. The smell had changed subtly. There was still the burnt wood and dead flowers, but now there was something new. Curiosity mixed with recognition, and beneath it all, almost imperceptible, the smell she most feared sensing from someone like Ethan Harrison. Hope. Hope smelled like the sea after a storm, salty and clean but dangerous. "You smell like an abyss," she finally said, her words coming out as a whisper. "Like someone who is always on the edge of a precipice, deciding whether to jump or turn back." Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "And you? Do you know what you smell like?" Sophia shook her head. "Like a sanctuary," he said, coming so close she could feel the heat from his body. "Like an abandoned church where one can still find peace. That's why the children calm down when you're near. That's why I—" He stopped talking, realizing he had said too much. Sophia observed him in silence, seeing the struggle in his honey-colored eyes. "That's why you what?" she asked, surprising herself with her own courage. Ethan reached out and lightly touched her face, his thumb caressing her cheek. "That's why I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since I got back from Geneva." His touch was warm, but Sophia could feel the smell changing again. Now there was desire mixed with fear, passion tempered with guilt. It was a dangerous smell, like gasoline near a flame. "Mr. Harrison," she began, but he shook his head. "Ethan," he said. "Up here, away from everything, just Ethan." "Ethan," she repeated, and the name sounded different in her voice, more intimate, more real. "You need to go downstairs, you need to rest." "I can't sleep," he admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see her face. I hear her voice begging me not to let her fall." She jumped. She was sick, like you, like your father, I imagine, but she couldn't handle it. The smells became too strong, too constant. She said I smelled like death, that our house smelled like a cemetery. In the end, she couldn't stay in the same room with me without having panic attacks. Sophia felt her heart tighten. She knew that feeling, the desperation of being bombarded by others' emotions with no escape. "And now you need to get married in 8 days, she said. 7, he corrected. "Today is already over." They remained silent for a moment, both aware they had crossed an invisible line. Sophia knew she should leave, go back to her room, pretend this conversation never happened. But there was something in Ethan's vulnerability that held her there, as if she had finally found another person who understood the weight of carrying impossible-to-explain secrets. The next 6 days passed in a blur of frustrated meetings and unsuitable candidates for Ethan. Each woman who entered the mansion seemed more interested in his fortune than in any possibility of real connection. Empty socialites who talked about renovations, models who wanted to use the marriage as a springboard to fame, calculating businesswomen who saw the union only as an opportunity to expand their businesses. Meanwhile, Sophia observed everything from a distance, caring for the twins and trying to ignore the looks Ethan gave her whenever their paths crossed in the mansion's corridors. Since that night in the attic, something had changed between them, An electric tension hung in the air whenever they were in the same room, and she could feel his smell gradually changing. Less abyss, more approaching storm. "Sophia, can you come here a moment?" asked Claire on Friday morning, the 6th day. The girl was in the playroom with Lucas, both bent over sheets of paper scattered across the floor. "What are you two doing, my loves?" asked Sophia, kneeling beside them. "We're drawing a wedding party for Uncle Ethan," explained Lucas, showing his drawing of a tall man next to a long-haired woman. "But we don't know how to draw the bride because he hasn't chosen one yet." Sophia felt a strange pang in her chest. "And why do you think he needs a wedding party?" "Because he gets sad when he's alone," said Claire, with the natural wisdom of children. "And when people get married, they're happy, like Daddy and Mummy were." The mention of their dead parents made Sophia swallow hard. Valerie and Robert had died in a car accident 2 years earlier, leaving the twins orphaned at 3 years old. Ethan had become the children's legal guardian, but his turbulent life and constant business trips meant he delegated daily care to Sophia. "Maybe you can give the drawings to him tonight," she suggested, ruffling their hair. "I'm sure he'll be very happy." But Ethan wasn't happy that night. In fact, he was visibly desperate when Sophia came down to get a cup of warm milk for Claire, who had had nightmares. It was almost 2 in the morning, and she found him in the kitchen, sitting at the marble table with a half-empty whiskey bottle and dozens of papers spread out before him. "Problems?" she asked softly, not wanting to startle him. Ethan looked up and she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. There was something more, humiliation. The smell coming from him was of wounded pride mixed with panic, like metal heated in fire. "The last candidate was a fraud," he said, his voice harsh from alcohol. "I discovered tonight that she's an actress hired by my half-brother Edward. He wants me to fail, to lose control of the company so he can take over as president." Sophia approached slowly, as if dealing with a wounded animal. "And there's no one else? No more candidates?" Ethan laughed bitterly. "Less than 24 hours remain, Sophia. My lawyer told me that if I'm not married by 6 o'clock tomorrow, my grandfather's will automatically transfer controlling interest to Edward. 3 generations of work lost because I couldn't find a woman willing to pretend she loves me." "Pretend? You think I believe in true love after what happened with Hannah? After growing up watching my parents destroy each other in the name of a perfect marriage, all I need is someone who can play the part well for a few months until I find a way to break the clauses of the will." Sophia poured the milk she had come to get, her hands trembling slightly as she heated the liquid on the stove. Ethan's smell of desperation was getting stronger, mixing with something she took time to identify. Loneliness. Loneliness had a particular smell, like a house closed for a long time, mold and silence. "And the children?" she asked. "What happens to Lucas and Claire if Edward takes control of the company?" Ethan ran his hands through his hair, messing up the dark strands. "Edward never liked children. He'll want to send them to a boarding school in Europe, far from here, far from you." His words hit her like a punch to the stomach. The idea of separating from the twins, of not being able to protect them, care for them, was unbearable. In the 2 years she had spent in that house, Lucas and Claire had become more than children under her care. They were her family, her purpose, the reason she could get up every morning. "There must be some solution," she said, turning off the heat and facing him. "Some woman who will accept the terms of the agreement. There's no time. And even if there were, I don't trust anyone else. All the candidates I've met in the last few weeks have made it clear they see me only as a blank check. They would do anything to destroy me if it meant a larger slice of the inheritance." Sophia looked at the children's drawings scattered on the table next to the marriage contracts. The drawings showed a happy family. Uncle Ethan, a smiling bride, and 2 children playing in the flower garden Claire had imagined. It was an innocent fantasy, a dream of stability and love that seemed impossible to achieve. That's when the words left her mouth before she could stop them. "Marry me." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language, his honey-colored eyes trying to process what he had just heard. "What did you say?" Sophia took a deep breath, gathering courage to repeat the proposal that could change her life forever. "Marry me, Ethan. I don't want your fortune. I have no social ambitions. All I want is to protect the children. We can make a deal, a pact. Marriage on paper, pretending in public, and everyone goes on with their lives. You keep the company. The children stay with me, and everyone wins." Ethan stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the marble floor. "Are you crazy? You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious," she replied, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. "Think about it. You've known me for 2 years. You know I'm not a gold digger, that I won't betray or blackmail you. I know how to keep secrets. And more importantly, the children trust me. Sophia, you don't understand what you're offering to do. A marriage to me isn't just signing papers. There are social expectations, public appearances, a lifetime of pretending." "I can handle it," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. "The question is, can you?" Ethan observed her silently for a long moment, as if seeing her for the first time. The smell emanating from him was changing again, surprise mixed with something she couldn't identify. Hope, perhaps, or fear. "Why would you do this for me? For us?" Sophia thought about the question, looking for an answer that wouldn't reveal too much about her own confused feelings. "Because you are the only family I have, because Claire and Lucas deserve to grow up in a place where they are loved, and because—" She hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Because I don't believe in fairy tales either, but I believe in partnerships, in people who help each other." Ethan took a few steps toward her, stopping so close that Sophia could see the small scars that marked his face. Memories of a childhood she suspected hadn't been easy. "If I agree to this," he said slowly, "there would be conditions, rules you would have to follow." "What rules?" "No separate bedrooms. The marriage has to look real to everyone, including the house staff, public dinners, social events, trips if necessary. And—" he paused, his eyes searching for hers, "you would have to pretend you love me, convincingly, for at least 30 days. Sophia's heart raced. "And after 30 days? "After 30 days we re-evaluate the agreement." She extended her right hand to him. "I accept." Ethan looked at the extended hand for a moment that seemed eternal. Then slowly he took it between his, sealing a pact that would change their lives forever. The wedding took place 16 hours later in an intimate ceremony at a downtown Chicago courthouse. Sophia wore a simple navy blue dress she had hurriedly bought at a department store, while Ethan wore an impeccable Italian suit that cost more than her annual salary. The only witnesses were Marcus, Ethan's assistant, and Mrs. Carter, the housekeeper who cried throughout the ceremony as if she were attending a funeral. "I, Ethan Harrison, take you, Sophia Richards, as my wife," he said at the moment of the vows, his voice firm but his eyes revealing the unreality of the situation. When it was her turn to repeat the words, Sophia felt as if she were outside her own body, watching a stranger sign her name next to that of the most powerful man she had ever known. The kiss sealing the union was chaste, a quick touch of the lips that lasted no more than a second. But it was enough for her to feel the smell of nervousness emanating from Ethan, mixed with something that surprised her. Relief, as if he could finally breathe after weeks of holding his breath. "Congratulations, Mrs. Harrison," said Marcus when they left the courthouse, handing her a bouquet of white roses he had arranged. The title sounded strange in her ears, as if it belonged to someone else. Back at the mansion, they were greeted by the twins, who had prepared a surprise party in the dining room. Claire and Lucas had scattered rose petals on the floor and hung colorful drawings on the walls, transforming the formal environment into something more cheerful and childlike. "Surprise!" shouted the children when they entered. "We made a real wedding party." Sophia knelt to hug them both, feeling her eyes fill with tears. All morning, she had concentrated on the practical aspects of the agreement with Ethan, but now seeing the genuine joy of the children, the reality of what she had done began to sink in. "You are the best," she said, kissing the sweaty foreheads of the twins. "The party is beautiful." "Now are you going to live in the same room?" asked Lucas with the typical curiosity of a 5-year-old. "Mrs. Carter said married people sleep in the same bed." Sophia felt her cheeks warm and avoided looking at Ethan. They had quickly discussed the practical details of the arrangement in the car on the way to the courthouse, but the room issue was still unexplored territory. "We will," said Ethan, placing his hand on her back in a gesture that seemed natural, but that made Sophia shiver. "First, let's eat the cake you prepared. Then we'll talk about these practical things." The afternoon passed in a haze of pretending and acting. Ethan was attentive and affectionate, holding her hand during the improvised lunch, pulling out her chair, whispering intimate comments in her ear that made the children laugh and clap. To any outside observer, They looked like a loving couple celebrating the beginning of a new life together. But Sophia could feel the tension in his body whenever they touched, could sense how his muscles contracted when she got too close. The smell emanating from Ethan was complex. Determination mixed with uncertainty, physical attraction fighting emotional resistance. When night came and the children were put to bed, they reached the moment both had avoided thinking about all day. Ethan led her to the master bedroom, a luxurious space dominated by a dark wood king-size bed and antique furniture that seemed to have been chosen more for status than comfort. "You can have the bed," he said, walking to the closet and taking out pajamas. "I'll sleep on the couch." "Don't be ridiculous," replied Sophia, looking at the two-seater sofa near the window. "You won't be able to sleep there. The bed is big enough for both of us." Ethan turned to face her, an indecipherable expression on his face. "Sophia, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable or pressured. This marriage may be a business arrangement, but you deserve to be respected." The unexpected gentleness caught her off guard. During the 2 years she had worked in that house, she had seen Ethan only as the distant and melancholic boss who appeared sporadically to check on the children. Now she was discovering layers of complexity she didn't know existed. "I don't feel pressured," she said, taking off her shoes and sitting on the edge of the bed. "We're adults. We can share a bed, without it meaning something more." But when they finally lay down, each on their side of the gigantic bed, the silence between them was charged with an electricity that neither wanted to acknowledge. Sophia remained rigid, concentrating on keeping her breathing regular, while listening to Ethan move restlessly beside her. "Can't sleep?" she asked after an hour of fruitless attempts. "I'm not used to sharing a bed," he admitted. "Not since—" Hannah, he confirmed. "And you? Can you feel anything through your synesthesia?" Sophia hesitated before answering. The truth was that she could feel a lot, perhaps too much. The smell coming from Ethan was a confused mixture of old loneliness, repressed desire, and fear of intimacy. But there was something else, something she couldn't completely decipher. "You smell like someone who is fighting against himself," she finally said. "As if there were two different people inside you and they were at war." Ethan was silent for so long that she thought he had fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely more than a whisper. "My family never showed affection. Love was a sign of weakness. Emotions were inconveniences that interfered with business. I learned to bury everything so deep that sometimes even I don't know what I really feel." And with Hannah, was it different? With Hannah, it was intense. She could make me feel things I thought were impossible, but she could also make me feel as if I were toxic, as if my touch could destroy anything good it touched. Sophia turned on her side to face him in the dark. She could see the profile of his face in the faint light coming through the window, the strong line of his jaw, the long eyelashes that cast shadows on his cheeks. "You're not toxic," she said softly. "You're just someone who never learned how to love without fear." "And have you learned?" The question caught her off guard. Sophia thought about her life until that moment. Orphaned at 16, caring for a mentally ill father, working temporary jobs until finding refuge in the Harrison house. Romantic love was a luxury she had never allowed herself to consider. "No," she admitted, "but maybe we can learn together. Even if it's just pretending." Ethan reached his hand across the space that separated them in the bed, his fingers finding hers in the dark. The touch was hesitant at first, then firmer when she didn't pull away. "Sophia." "Yes?" "Thank you for agreeing to do this, for saving the children, for saving me too in a way." She squeezed his hand in response, feeling the smell changing again. Now there was gratitude mixed with something she was beginning to recognize as genuine affection. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something real, growing amid the pretense. "Just promise me one thing," she said. "What?" "If at any point you feel this isn't working, that it's hurting you, tell me. Let's not repeat the mistakes of the past." "I promise," he said, and for the first time since they'd met, Sophia completely believed the words of Ethan Harrison. They fell asleep still holding hands, two strangers united by an impossible agreement, beginning to discover that sometimes the most necessary lies can transform into the most precious truths. The first 15 days of marriage passed in a strangely domestic routine. Ethan cancelled all business trips, working mainly from the home office to maintain the appearance of a besotted newlywed. Every morning, he and Sophia had breakfast together on the veranda overlooking the garden, him reading the financial newspaper while she helped the twins with breakfast. To any staff member observing them, they were the perfect picture of a harmonious family. But Sophia noticed the small cracks in the facade, the way Ethan stiffened when she accidentally touched his arm while passing the sugar, how he avoided her gaze when she came out of the bathroom, still wrapped in steam with wet hair, how he always went to bed last, waiting for her to be asleep to avoid the forced intimacy of sharing the bed. The smell emanating from him was also gradually changing. The initial resistance was giving way to something more complex. Curiosity mixed with frustration, physical attraction fighting against emotional barriers he had built over years. It was on the morning of the 16th day that things began to crumble. Sophia went down to prepare breakfast as she always did, but found Mrs. Carter standing in the kitchen with a worried expression on her face, holding a sheet of paper in her trembling hands. "Mrs. Harrison," said the housekeeper, using the title that still sounded strange. "This arrived in the mail this morning." Sophia took the paper and felt her blood freeze in her veins. It was a copy of a death certificate, her own death certificate, dated 3 years earlier. Someone had forged documents stating that Sophia Richards had died in a car accident in a small town in Illinois. "This is impossible," she murmured, her hands trembling as she examined the document. "Who would send something like this?" "There's a note attached," said Mrs. Carter, handing her a small folded paper. In elegant handwritten calligraphy, someone had written, "The dead cannot marry. The marriage is invalid. You have 48 hours to leave the mansion, or your true identity will be revealed to the press." Sophia sat heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, trying to process the information. Who would do something like this? And more importantly, how had someone managed to forge official documents with such perfection? That's when she heard Ethan's footsteps coming down the stairs. She quickly folded the papers and hid them in her apron pocket, forcing a smile when he entered the kitchen. "Good morning," he said, lightly kissing her forehead in a gesture that had become automatic in recent days. "Did you sleep well?" "Very well," she lied, serving him coffee as she always did. "And you?" Ethan studied her for a moment, as if he could sense something was wrong. "You're pale, aren't you feeling well?" "Just a little tired," she said, avoiding his gaze. "Maybe I'm catching a cold." But as the day progressed, Sophia felt increasingly paranoid. Every staff member who greeted her seemed to be analyzing her face with more attention than normal. Every phone call Ethan received made her wonder if it was about her. When he left for a quick meeting at the company office, she ran to the bedroom and called the courthouse where they had gotten married. "I'd like to verify the validity of a marriage certificate," she said to the clerk, providing her personal information. After a few minutes on hold, the answer came like a blow. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there's an irregularity in your documents. Our system shows that Mrs. Sophia Richards died in 2021. The marriage registered at our courthouse will be investigated for possible document fraud." Sophia hung up the phone with trembling hands. Someone had manipulated the official systems to make her marriage to Ethan invalid. But who would have the power and resources to do something like this? The answer came when she went downstairs for a glass of water and heard voices coming from Ethan's office. The door was ajar, and she could clearly hear the phone conversation he was having. "Edward, I don't know what you're talking about," Ethan was saying, his voice tense. "My marriage is completely legal and valid." His half-brother's voice sounded metallic through the speakerphone. Ethan, always so naive. Did you really think I would let you defeat me so easily? Your precious wife doesn't officially exist. Sophia Richards died 3 years ago, my brother. You married a ghost. That's ridiculous. She's here, she's alive, she is who exactly? Because the real Sophia Richards is buried in a cemetery in Peoria. Who is this woman living in your house, taking care of the children, sleeping in your bed? Do you have the slightest idea? Sophia felt the world spinning around her. Edward was right. She had never questioned why she had gotten the nanny job so easily, why Valerie had hired her without references, why she had never had problems with documents or background checks. "You have 24 hours to annul this fake marriage," continued Edward, "or I myself will reveal to the press that the powerful Ethan Harrison was deceived by an imposter. Imagine the headlines: Magnate marries woman with false identity. Your reputation will be destroyed, and the board will have no choice but to hand me the presidency of the company. Sophia heard Ethan slam his fist on the table. Even if you're right about the documents, it doesn't change anything. I'm keeping my marriage. Ah, but it changes everything. Because if your wife is using a false identity, who's to say she's not a criminal, a con artist, someone planted by our competitors to destroy the company from within? The board will demand a full investigation, and while that happens, you'll be removed from all executive functions. The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia moved away from the door, her mind racing. Edward was right. She really didn't know who she was. The memories of her childhood were fragmented, full of gaps she had always attributed to the trauma of her mother's death and her father's mental illness. But what if it was something more? She ran upstairs to the bedroom and began searching through her few personal belongings. At the bottom of a drawer, she found the ID card she had used for years. The plastic was slightly faded, but it looked authentic. There was also a birth certificate, school certificates, proof of old addresses. But now, looking more carefully, she noticed small inconsistencies, dates that didn't match perfectly, a photo that seemed to have been pasted over another, subtle details that only someone with resources and technical knowledge could create. When Ethan came up to the bedroom an hour later, he found her sitting on the bed surrounded by scattered documents, with tears running down her face. "Sophia," he said softly, approaching slowly, "we need to talk." "I heard," she said without raising her eyes. "Edward is right, isn't he? I'm not who I think I am." Ethan sat on the bed beside her, the mattress sinking under his weight. "What do you remember about your life before coming to work here?" Sophia tried to organize her memories, but they seemed hazy, as if she were trying to hold water in her hands. "I remember my mother dying when I was 16, my father getting sick, working in various places until getting the job here. But the details are vague, as if I was seeing everything through a foggy glass." "And before 16, your childhood?" "Fragments, loose images, a small house, playing in the yard, my mother singing. But when I try to focus on the memories, they escape." Ethan gently took her face between his hands, forcing her to look him in the eyes. "It doesn't matter who you were before. What matters is who you are now. And the woman I've known for the last 2 years is kind, brave, protective. She's someone who loves these children more than her own life. But what if Edward is right? What if I'm dangerous? What if my presence here puts you and the children at risk? Then we'll face it together," he said, lightly kissing her forehead. "First we'll discover the truth about who you really are. Then we'll decide what to do." Sophia nestled against his chest, feeling the smell changing once more. Now there was determination mixed with something she was beginning to recognize as protection. Ethan was becoming possessive of her even without realizing it. "And if the truth is worse than we imagine?" she whispered. "Then we'll face that too," he replied, holding her against him. "Because one thing I've learned in the last few days, whoever you are, whatever your past, you've become part of this family, and I protect what's mine." The word mine made her shudder, but not from fear. It was the first time someone had claimed her, that someone was willing to fight for her, even without knowing the whole truth. That night Sophia couldn't sleep. Lying next to Ethan, who had finally relaxed enough to fall into a deep sleep, she watched the shadows dance on the ceiling while her mind tried to decipher the puzzle of her own existence. Edward's words echoed in her head like a disturbing mantra. "Who is this woman living in your house?" Around 3 in the morning, she gave up trying to sleep and silently left the bed. Ethan murmured something unintelligible in his sleep, turning to the side where she had been, as if searching for the warmth of her body. The unconscious intimacy of the gesture made her heart tighten. In recent days, they had begun to move toward each other during sleep, finding comfort in proximity, even though their conscious minds still kept a distance. She went downstairs thinking of making tea, but ended up being drawn to the garden by the moonlight that illuminated Valerie's wild rose bushes. The night air was fresh and filled with the perfume of flowers, a comforting contrast to the confusion of emotional smells she had felt all day. That's when she noticed a faint light on the 3rd floor. The attic was lit again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She climbed the stairs silently, guided by an urgency she couldn't explain. She knew she needed to find answers, and something told her they were hidden in that room Ethan visited on sleepless nights. The attic door was ajar, but there was no one inside. The candles she had seen the previous night were extinguished, but a small LED lantern illuminated the central table. where Hannah's belongings continued organized like a shrine. Sophia approached slowly, examining the photographs, letters, and personal objects of the dead fiancé. That's when she saw a shoebox in the corner of the table, partially hidden behind a picture frame. Her hands trembled when she opened it, revealing dozens of documents organized in labeled folders. One of the labels immediately caught her attention. Sophia Richards, Investigation. With her heart racing, she opened the folder and found a meticulous investigation into her own life. There were photographs of her that she didn't remember being taken, copies of documents she had never seen, medical reports from hospitals where she had supposedly been admitted. And at the bottom of the folder, a report signed by a private investigator, dated 3 years earlier, just 1 week after Hannah's death. Subject, Sophia Richards. Background check for nanny position, read the header. Sophia read the report with growing horror. According to the document, the real Sophia Richards had indeed died in a car accident 3 years earlier. But there was also information about another person, a young woman of 25, found in a catatonic state in a psychiatric hospital in Peoria, with no documents, no memories, no known identity. The patient showed signs of severe trauma and selective memory loss, said the report. She responded well to occupational therapy and demonstrated a natural aptitude for childcare. Employment in a structured family environment is recommended as part of rehabilitation. The following pages revealed how Valerie had assumed legal responsibility for her, providing falsified documents that gave her the identity of the dead Sophia. It was an act of charity but also of desperation. Valerie needed someone to care for her young children while dealing with her own marital problems. "Who are you?" Ethan's voice made her turn abruptly. He was standing at the attic door wearing only pajama pants, his hair messy from sleep, but his eyes were completely alert, as if he already knew what she had discovered. "You knew," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "From the beginning you knew I wasn't really Sophia Richards." Ethan entered the attic and closed the door behind him. "Valerie told me before she died. She had cancer for months, hiding it from everyone. She knew she didn't have much time and wanted to make sure you and the children would be protected. That's why you never questioned when I offered to marry you. You already knew my past was a lie." "I knew your documents were false," he admitted, approaching slowly. "But that didn't make your feelings for the children any less real. It didn't make your kindness any less genuine." Sophia turned to face him, the pages of the report still trembling in her hands. "But who am I really, Ethan? Where did I come from? Why was I in that hospital?" "That's the problem," he said, taking some sheets from a drawer in the table. "I hired several investigators over the last 3 years. None could discover your true identity. It's as if you had appeared out of nowhere at 25. He handed her the additional reports. Sophia read with growing despair about fruitless searches in databases of missing persons, DNA analyses that found no matches, consultations with specialists in traumatic amnesia who only confirmed that her memory loss was real and possibly irreversible. "There's a theory," said Ethan hesitantly. "One of the psychiatrists who examined you believes you may have suffered a trauma so severe that your mind created a complete barrier against previous memories, like a defense mechanism. What kind of trauma would be so bad that my own mind would decide it was better to completely forget who I was?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he approached and gently touched her face, as if memorizing her features. "Maybe it's better not to know. Maybe your mind is right to protect you from those memories. But what if Edward is right? What if I'm dangerous? What if—" "Stop," he interrupted, placing a finger on her lips. "I've known you for 2 years. I've seen how you care for the children, how you treat the staff, how you worry about others before thinking of yourself. Whoever you were before, the person you are now is someone I—" He stopped talking, as if the words had gotten stuck in his throat. "Someone you what?" she whispered. "Someone I can't imagine losing," he finally said. The air between them became charged with an electricity that had been growing for weeks. Sophia could feel the smell changing again, desire mixed with vulnerability, passion fighting against fear. But there was something new too, possessiveness. Ethan was becoming territorial toward her in a way that transcended their business agreement. "Ethan," she began, but he shook his head. "I know our marriage started as an agreement. I know you offered to help me because of the children, but something has changed in the last few days, and I know you feel it too." He was right. Sophia could deny it to herself all she wanted, but the truth was that she had begun to care for Ethan in a way that went far beyond a simple business agreement. The way he worried about the twins, how he treated the staff with respect, how he carried the weight of responsibilities he hadn't chosen, all of this had awakened feelings she didn't know she was capable of having. "What are you saying?" she asked, even already knowing the answer. "I'm saying I don't care who you were before. I'm saying the woman standing in front of me now is the only one who matters, and I'm saying that if Edward or anyone else tries to take you away from me, they'll have to go through me first." The intensity in his voice made her shudder. It was a declaration of possession, of protection, of something that was dangerously close to love. "And if we discover my past is terrible? What if I did things I don't remember? Then we'll face it together," he said, pulling her closer. "But one thing I can guarantee you, I won't let anyone destroy the family we've built, even if it's a family built on lies." Sophia allowed herself to relax in his arms, feeling for the first time in years that she belonged somewhere, to someone. The smell emanating from Ethan now was of absolute determination, mixed with something she could finally identify: nascent love. Not the mature and stable love she imagined from fairy tales, but something fierce and protective, forged in mutual need and tempered by danger. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now we go to bed," he said, lightly kissing her forehead. "Tomorrow we start fighting. Because Edward may think he discovered our weak point, but he has no idea what two desperate people are capable of doing to protect what they love." The next 5 days were a silent war. Edward had fulfilled his threat, spreading rumors about Sophia's false identity through discreet but effective channels. Journalists began to circle the mansion. Company board members made concerned calls to Ethan, and lawyers appeared with court summons questioning the legality of the marriage. Ethan reacted like a lion protecting its cub. He hired the best lawyers in Chicago, threatened to sue any media outlet that published unverified information, and used all his political and economic influence to stifle the scandal before it gained larger proportions. But the pressure was taking its toll. Sophia could feel the growing tension through her synesthesia. The smell emanating from Ethan constantly changed: burning anger when he spoke to Edward on the phone, acrid anxiety during meetings with lawyers, heavy exhaustion when he thought she wasn't looking. But always there was that underground current of fierce protection that made her feel simultaneously safe and guilty. "You don't have to do this for me," she said on the 5th night, finding him in the office at 2 in the morning surrounded by piles of legal documents. "Maybe Edward is right. Maybe it's better if I just disappear." Ethan looked up from the papers and she saw something wild gleaming there. "If you try to leave me, I will find you," he said with a calmness that was more threatening than any shout. "No matter where you go, no matter how you try to hide, you're my wife, and I don't give up what's mine." The raw possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her, but instead it awakened something primitive in her chest. No one had ever fought for her like this. No one had ever considered her valuable enough to deserve unconditional protection. "Ethan?" "No," he interrupted, standing and walking to her. "Don't try to be noble. Don't try to protect me by sacrificing yourself. This isn't about documents or legalities. This is about the fact that in the last 3 weeks, you've become essential to me in a way I can't explain." He stopped in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You want to know the truth? The truth is that when I wake up in the morning and see you sleeping beside me, for the first time in years I don't immediately think of Hannah. When I see you laughing with the children, when I see you taking care of this house, when I smell your scent on the pillow, in those moments, I forget that our marriage began as a lie." His words hit her like punches to the chest. Sophia knew she was entering dangerous territory, that allowing real feelings to develop would make everything more complicated. But it was too late. She had already fallen, was already completely involved in this web of pretense that had become more real than any truth she had ever known. "And if we discover something terrible about my past, then we deal with it," he said, gently touching her face. "Together." It was at that moment they heard screams coming from upstairs. Children's voices, filled with terror, calling for them. Ethan and Sophia ran to the twins' room, finding Claire and Lucas hugging each other in bed, pointing at the window with eyes wide with fear. "There's a woman in the garden," sobbed Claire. "A woman in a white dress. She was looking at our window." Ethan immediately checked the window locks, while Sophia hugged the children. "It was probably just a branch moving in the wind," he said, but his voice was tense. "You know, sometimes shadows look like people in the dark." "It wasn't a shadow," insisted Lucas. "It was a real woman. She waved at us." Sophia exchanged a worried look with Ethan. In recent days, the children had been exhibiting strange behaviors. Frequent nightmares, refusal to play alone, disturbing drawings of faceless female figures. She had attributed it to the stress of the situation with Edward. But now she began to wonder if there was something more. "How about you sleep in our room tonight?" she suggested. "We can have a pajama party." The children eagerly agreed, and soon all four were settled in the king-size bed of the master bedroom. Ethan and Sophia stayed awake long after the twins fell asleep, whispering in the dark about their concerns. "Do you think Edward would be capable of scaring the children to pressure us?" asked Sophia. "Edward is ambitious, but he's not cruel to children," replied Ethan. "At least he never was." "Then what's happening?" Ethan was silent for so long that she thought he had fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was just a whisper. "Hannah used to say this house had memories, that she could feel the presence of people who had suffered here. I always thought it was paranoia caused by her synesthesia, but sometimes late at night I also feel as if someone is watching, as if the walls held secrets we don't want to know." A chill ran down Sophia's spine. She had felt it too, a persistent sensation of being observed, especially when she passed near the attic or the garden where Hannah had died. The storm arrived the next morning, transforming day into night with black clouds that seemed to touch the top of the mansion. The rain beat against the windows with unusual force, and the winds made the ancient garden trees moan like wounded creatures. Ethan was in an important video conference with lawyers when the electrical power failed. The emergency generator turned on automatically, but only the essential lights worked, leaving most of the house in shadow. That's when Sophia heard Claire crying upstairs. She ran up and found the girl in the hallway, pointing toward the attic. "The woman in white went up there," sobbed Claire. "She called me, said she wanted to show me something pretty." Sophia's blood froze. "Claire, sweetheart, there's no one there. It must have been your imagination." "It wasn't imagination. She said she knows you, that you were friends before." Before Sophia could respond, they heard footsteps coming from the attic. Slow, deliberate footsteps, as if someone were walking back and forth in the locked room. Sophia picked up Claire and quickly descended the stairs, finding Ethan in the entrance hall, hanging up his cell phone. "The lawyers want to meet tomorrow morning," he said, then noticed the panic expression on her face. "What happened?" "Claire said she saw someone going up to the attic, and I heard footsteps." Ethan stood still for a moment, then took a key from his pocket. "Stay here with the children," he said, heading for the stairs. "No!" Sophia grabbed his arm. "Don't go alone." "Sophia, if there's someone in my house, I need to—" The sound of glass shattering interrupted him. It came from the garden, from the direction of the greenhouse where Valerie used to cultivate orchids. Ethan ran to the window and saw that all the glass panes of the small structure had been broken, as if something had exploded from inside out. "Take the children to the car," he said, his voice cutting. "Now." "Ethan!" "Now, Sophia." But before she could move, Lucas appeared at the top of the stairs, screaming, "Uncle Ethan, the woman in white is in your room. She's going through your things." Ethan ran up the stairs 3 at a time, Sophia behind him with Claire still in her arms. They reached the master bedroom and found the door wide open, papers scattered on the floor, drawers open, and in the center of the mess a photograph of Hannah that had been removed from the attic and placed on the bed. But it wasn't the photo that made Sophia scream. It was the note left on the pillow, written in the same elegant handwriting she recognized from the false documents. "He promised he would love me forever. Now it's your turn to pay for taking my place." Ethan picked up the note, his hands trembling with anger. "This has gone beyond all limits," he muttered. "Edward can play with me, but not with my family." That's when they heard the sound. A female laugh, low and melancholy, coming from the garden. They all ran to the window and saw a figure dressed in white standing among the rose bushes, almost invisible through the curtain of rain. "Hannah," whispered Ethan, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and recognition. The figure waved slowly, then turned and walked toward the back of the property, disappearing into the darkness of the storm. "This is impossible," said Sophia, But even as she spoke, she could smell a familiar scent in the air, the smell of madness she knew so well from her time with her father. Only now the smell wasn't coming from inside the house. It was coming from the garden. The truth came to light, as it always does, in a brutal and inescapable way. The morning after the storm, when the winds finally ceased and the sun tried to penetrate through the heavy clouds that still hung over Chicago, a man appeared at the mansion door. Tall, thin, with graying hair and tired eyes, he introduced himself as Dr. Richard Moreno, psychiatrist from the St. Helena Clinic in Lake Forest. "I've come to get my patient," he said simply, showing documents that made Ethan's hands tremble as he read. Hannah Mitchell hadn't died 3 years before. She had been secretly committed to the clinic after a severe psychotic episode that made her try to kill herself in the mansion's garden. Her family, desperate to avoid scandal, had bribed authorities to forge a death certificate, while Hannah was treated in a reserved wing of the psychiatric clinic. "She escaped 3 days ago," explained Dr. Moreno, accepting the cup of coffee Sophia offered with trembling hands. "We had made significant progress in recent months. She was lucid, responsive, seemed to be recovering from the psychosis induced by emotional synesthesia. But when she found out through a clinic employee that you had married again—" "How did she know?" interrupted Ethan, his voice hoarse. "Apparently, she still has contacts who keep her informed about your life. The news of the marriage triggered a severe regression. She started having hallucinations again, believing that her replacement had been sent to take her place permanently." Sophia felt her blood freeze in her veins. "She sees me as a threat." "Worse than that," said the psychiatrist gravely. "She believes you are a projection of her own guilt, a punishment for having abandoned Ethan. In her current state, she is capable of anything to correct what she perceives as a cosmic error." It was then that Mrs. Carter entered the room, carrying a tray of cookies, but with a worried expression on her face. "Mr. Ethan," she said hesitantly, "the children aren't in their room. I've looked all over the house." The world seemed to stop. Ethan stood up so abruptly that he knocked over the coffee cup, the dark liquid spreading across the Persian rug like a bloodstain. "When did you see them last?" he asked, already running to the stairs. "An hour ago, when they went up to play," replied Mrs. Carter, running after him. "I thought they might be in the attic because sometimes they—" "The attic is locked," interrupted Ethan, climbing the steps 3 at a time. "I locked it myself after last night." But when they reached the 3rd floor, the attic door was wide open, and stuck to the corridor wall was a drawing done with crayons. 2 children holding hands with a long-haired woman walking toward a garden full of flowers. "She took them," whispered Sophia, recognizing the drawing style Claire had recently developed. Hannah convinced the children to go with her. Dr. Moreno examined the drawing with a somber expression. Hannah always had a way with children. In her current state, she probably believes she is saving the twins from a dangerous situation. To her, you are the threat, and she needs to protect the children from your influence. Ethan was already on the phone with private security, organizing a systematic search of the property and surrounding areas. But Sophia knew through the synesthesia that sometimes seemed more curse than gift, that Hannah hadn't taken the children far. The smell of madness still hung in the air, concentrated and persistent, coming from the direction of the garden. "She's here," said Sophia, interrupting the urgent instructions Ethan was giving on the phone. "Still on the property. I can feel it." "Where?" Sophia closed her eyes, concentrating on the emotional smells that constantly bombarded her. Beyond Hannah's madness, there was fear, the innocent fear of the children mixed with confusion, and beneath it all, something that made her feel physically ill, the sweet and rotten smell of obsession like fruit rotting in the sun. "The garden," she said, opening her eyes. Near where she tried to kill herself the first time." They ran out of the house, followed by Dr. Moreno, who carried a medical bag and a syringe that Sophia preferred not to ask about. The back garden of the mansion was a maze of serpentine paths between beds of roses, jasmine, and hydrangeas that Valerie had planted years before. In the center of this maze was a small white-painted wooden pavilion where the family used to have tea on summer afternoons. That's where they found Hannah. She was sitting in one of the pavilion chairs, with Claire in her lap and Lucas at her side, all 3 dressed in white clothes she had improvised with sheets. Hannah was even more beautiful than in the photographs. Blonde hair that fell like a cascade down her back, porcelain skin, blue eyes that must have once been hypnotizing, but now those eyes shone with the feverish light of insanity. "Ethan," she said in a sweet voice that made Sophia shiver, "you finally came. And you brought the intruder." "Hannah," said Ethan carefully, stopping a few meters from the pavilion, "it's me you want. Leave the children in peace." "Oh, but I don't want to hurt the children," replied Hannah, stroking Claire's hair with movements that seemed affectionate, but that made the girl cringe with fear. "I want to save them, just as I want to save you from this woman who isn't who she claims to be." "Hannah, you're not well," tried Dr. Moreno, approaching slowly. "You need to come back to the clinic. Take your medication." "I am perfectly lucid," shouted Hannah, and for the first time Sophia saw the true extent of her instability. "You don't understand. She isn't real. This woman you call Sophia, I know her. I know who she really is." Sophia's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" Hannah laughed, a high and crystalline sound that echoed through the garden like breaking glass. "You don't remember me, do you? But I remember you. We met at the clinic before I came here. You were in the intensive care ward, completely catatonic, but sometimes late at night you would talk in your sleep." "That's impossible," murmured Sophia. But even as she denied it, fragments of memories began to emerge like bubbles, rising to the surface of a dark lake. "You talked about fire," continued Hannah, her eyes fixed on Sophia's face. "About screams. About how you couldn't save your family when your house caught fire. About how you watched everyone die while you survived." Hannah's words hit Sophia like bullets. Suddenly, images began to invade her mind. Orange flames licking familiar walls, black smoke filling her lungs, desperate voices calling for help she couldn't give. And at the center of it all, the crushing guilt of being the only survivor of a tragedy she could have prevented. "No," she whispered, falling to her knees on the wet grass. "No, that's not true. Your name is Madison Scott," said Hannah triumphantly. "You were 23 when you killed your entire family because of a forgotten cigarette. 2 elderly parents, a disabled sister, a 3-year-old nephew, all dead because of your negligence." The truth exploded in Sophia's mind like a bomb. Madison Scott, that was her real name. And Hannah was right. She had been responsible for the death of her family. The guilt had been so unbearable that her mind had simply erased everything, creating the illusion of amnesia to protect her from an unbearable truth. "Now do you see?" continued Hannah, hugging the children tighter. "She's a killer, a woman who kills families. Would you trust your children to someone like that?" Ethan looked at Sophia, or Madison, with an expression she couldn't decipher. Horror? Disgust? Pity? She didn't know, and at that moment she couldn't bear to find out. "Is it true?" he asked in a low voice. Sophia, Madison, closed her eyes and let the memories return completely. The modest house in a small town, her elderly parents who depended on her sister Julia, who had been born with intellectual disability and needed constant care. Little Miguel, Julia's son, with a man who had abandoned the family when he discovered his wife's disability. And on that terrible night, she had smoked a cigarette on the porch after an exhausting day caring for everyone. She had extinguished it poorly, thrown the butt in a pot with dry plants and gone to sleep. 2 hours later, she woke up with the house in flames and her family screaming for help. She had tried to save them. God knew she had tried, but the flames spread too quickly, and she only managed to escape through her own bedroom window before the roof collapsed. "It's true," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "My name is Madison Scott. And I killed my family." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Hannah laughing in triumph and Claire's silent tears, who had finally understood that something terrible was happening. The silence in the garden extended for an eternity. Madison, she could no longer think of herself as Sophia, remained kneeling on the wet grass, her confession echoing in the air like a death sentence. Ethan observed her with an expression she couldn't decipher, while Hannah smiled triumphantly, hugging the children as if they were trophies she had won. "Now you understand, my love," said Hannah to Ethan, her voice taking on an almost maternal tone. "I came back to protect you, to protect our family. This woman is dangerous. She kills the people she loves." "Hannah," said Dr. Moreno carefully, taking a step forward, "you need to let the children go. They have nothing to do with this." "They have everything to do with it," exploded Hannah, her blue eyes shining with fury. She's already contaminating these children with her toxic presence. Don't you see? That's exactly how it started with her family. Caring, pretending love, and then fire. Always fire. Madison lifted her head, forcing herself to look at the children she had learned to love as if they were her own. Claire stared at her with large, frightened eyes, while Lucas hid behind Hannah, clearly confused and terrified. "You're right," said Madison, her voice gaining strength. "I killed my family. I am responsible for the death of 4 innocent people. But there's a difference between us, Hannah." "What difference?" asked Hannah, tilting her head like a curious bird. "I don't use my pain as an excuse to terrorize children." Madison stood up slowly, wiping the dirt from her knees. The smell of Hannah's madness was getting stronger, now mixed with something new, growing paranoia and uncontrolled anger. "You want to blame me for what happened? Want to punish me? Fine, but leave Claire and Lucas out of this. They don't deserve to pay for my sins." "They're already paying," shouted Hannah, squeezing Claire against her in a way that made the girl moan in pain. "Living under the same roof as a killer, breathing the same air. Don't you see she'll kill them too? It's what she does." That's when Ethan finally spoke. His voice was low, controlled, but Madison could feel the storm of emotions behind the words. "Hannah, look at me." She turned to face him, and for a moment her face softened, as if she were seeing the man she had loved years before. "You say you love me," continued Ethan, "that you came back to protect me. But this isn't love, Hannah. This is obsession. And it's hurting innocent people. I am saving you," she insisted, "like no one saved me when I was losing my sanity in this house." "I tried to save you," said Ethan, taking a cautious step toward the pavilion. "Remember? That night, when you were on the edge of the veranda, I begged you not to jump. I held your hand until the last second." For a moment, Hannah seemed to hesitate, as if she were fighting against her own distorted memories. "You let me fall," she murmured. "You chose to let me fall." "No, Hannah, you let go. And I blamed myself for it for 3 years, until I realized I couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved." Madison watched the exchange between them, feeling through her synesthesia the complex web of emotions that unfolded. Hannah's sick love for Ethan, mixed with resentment and delusions. Ethan's guilt and frustration, tempered with a growing determination to protect the children. And beneath it all, her own heart breaking as she realized she had lost any chance of happiness she might have had. "I'll leave," she said suddenly, interrupting the conversation. "Hannah, you're right. I am dangerous. I shouldn't be near children, shouldn't be pretending I can have a normal family. I'll leave your lives and you can have Ethan." "No," said Ethan immediately, turning to face her. "You're not going anywhere. Ethan, you heard what she said. You saw who I really am. How can you want me to stay?" He walked to her, completely ignoring Hannah and the children, stopping so close that Madison could see the small scars on his face, could feel the heat of his body. "You want to know what I saw," he said, his voice low but intense. "I saw a woman who carried an impossible guilt for 3 years. I saw someone who loved her family so much that her mind preferred to erase everything rather than live with the pain. I saw a person who, even believing herself to be cursed, chose to dedicate her life to caring for other children." "Ethan, I'm not finished," he interrupted. "I saw a woman who offered to marry me to protect 2 orphaned children, who slept by my side every night without ever trying to take advantage of the situation, who looked at me in my worst moments and didn't run away." Hannah was becoming increasingly agitated, murmuring incoherent things while rocking Claire as if she were a doll. "You think I care about what happened 3 years ago," continued Ethan. "You think that changes anything about what I feel for you now?" Madison felt tears burning her eyes. "How can you not care? I killed my family, Ethan. I'm exactly the kind of person Hannah says I am." "No," he said, holding her face between his hands. "You're the woman I love, and I'm not going to let you go." Moreno took advantage of the distraction to approach from behind and administer the sedation he had prepared. Hannah struggled for a few seconds, then collapsed in the pavilion chair, finally releasing Claire, who immediately ran to Ethan's arms. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It was a silence of relief, of a storm that had finally passed, of truths revealed and accepted. "What now?" asked Madison, still holding Lucas, who had stopped crying and begun to fall asleep in her arms, exhausted by the emotional tension. Ethan looked at her with an expression that mixed determination and tenderness. "Now we go home." We'll put the children to bed. And tomorrow we start our real life, without lies, without pretending, without marriage contracts. But Ethan, you don't understand. I really killed... Madison, he said, interrupting her. You suffered a terrible accident. You made a mistake that resulted in tragedy, but you're not a killer. And I won't let you punish yourself for the rest of your life for something that was an accident. Madison looked at him through her tears, seeing in those honey-colored eyes not judgment or disgust, but total acceptance. For the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved a second chance at happiness. I love you too, she whispered, even though I shouldn't. You should, he corrected, approaching to kiss her softly, with Lucas still sleeping between them and Claire clinging to his leg. We all deserve love, especially people who think they don't deserve it. 6 months later, Madison Scott Harrison was in the mansion's garden, watching Claire and Lucas play among the rose bushes that had been replanted after the storm. The May sun in Chicago filtered through sparse clouds, creating a pattern of light and shadow that danced on the freshly cut lawn. It was a perfect autumn afternoon, the kind of day she had learned to appreciate without fear that happiness would be snatched away from her at any moment. The last few months had been a journey of reconstruction in every sense. After Hannah was committed to the clinic again, this time permanently with rigorous medical supervision, Madison and Ethan had begun the hard work of building a relationship based on the complete truth about who they really were. Madison had spent 3 months in intensive therapy with a psychologist specializing in trauma and survivor's guilt. For the first time in 3 years, she had properly mourned the family she lost, had allowed herself to feel anger at the cruel accident of fate, and more importantly, had begun to forgive herself for the tragedy she could not have foreseen or prevented. Survivor's guilt is one of the cruelest forms of psychological torture, Dr. Fernandez had said during one of the sessions. You punish yourself for being alive when others died, as if your survival were a betrayal. But the truth is that your family wouldn't have wanted you to die with them. They would have wanted you to live, to be happy, to honor their memories by being the best version of yourself. Ethan had also made his own journey of self-discovery. With Hannah finally receiving proper treatment and Edward defeated in a legal battle that lasted months, he could focus on breaking the toxic patterns he had learned in his family. Individual therapy, couples therapy, long and honest conversations that lasted until the early hours of the morning, all part of the process of learning to love without fear, without excessive control, without the constant paranoia that happiness would inevitably be destroyed. "Daddy Ethan!" shouted Claire, running toward the veranda where he had just appeared, carrying a tray with lemonade and cookies. "Look at the flower I found." Madison smiled, seeing the interaction. The children had begun calling them Daddy Ethan and Mommy Madison naturally, without prompting or pressure. It was as if their small souls had instinctively recognized that they had found the parents fate had intended to give them from the beginning. "It's a wild rose," said Ethan, kneeling to examine the pink flower Claire was carefully holding. "Your mother, Valerie, planted these before you were born. She said wildflowers were the most resilient because they learned to grow even in difficult conditions." "Like Mommy Madison," said Lucas, running to join the group. "She grew even when she was sad, right?" Madison felt her eyes fill with tears. Not of sadness, but the kind of overwhelming emotion that comes when you realize you've finally found your place in the world. She approached the small group, sitting on the grass beside Ethan and pulling the children into a group hug. "Exactly like your Mommy Madison," agreed Ethan, lightly kissing her forehead. "Strong, resilient, and capable of bringing beauty to any place she is." The smell emanating from him at that moment was pure love, not the toxic and obsessive passion that had characterized his relationship with Hannah, but something solid, constant, mature. It smelled like wet earth mixed with jasmine, exactly as Madison had felt the first time he said he loved her. "Are you going to get married again?" asked Claire with the typical curiosity of a 6-year-old. "For real this time, with a white dress and a big cake?" Madison exchanged a look with Ethan. Technically, they were still married. The lawyers had managed to regularize all the documentation, legally establishing Madison's new identity and retroactively validating the marriage. But they had talked about having a real ceremony, a celebration of real love instead of desperate convenience. "Maybe," said Ethan, winking at Madison. "What do you think, love? Want to marry me again?" said Madison, pretending to seriously consider the proposal. "Let me think. Marry a handsome, rich man who makes breakfast for me every morning and who loves my children as if they were his own? What a difficult decision." "Your children?" repeated Ethan, raising an eyebrow. "I thought they were our children." "They are," said Madison, smiling. "Our children, our house, our crazy and imperfect life that I wouldn't trade for anything in the world." They had talked about having more children. Madison had discovered she couldn't get pregnant due to medical complications resulting from the trauma of the fire, but they were considering adoption. There was no rush, they had time, had enough love for a family as large as they wanted to build. "So it's yes," insisted Claire. "You'll have a big party?" "With chocolate cake," added Lucas hopefully. "With chocolate cake," confirmed Madison, laughing. "And you two will be the ring bearer and flower girl." The children shouted with joy and ran off to tell the news to Mrs. Carter, leaving Madison and Ethan alone in the garden. He turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "Are you sure?" he asked seriously. "Because once you marry me for love instead of convenience, there will be no going back. You'll be stuck with me forever." "Stuck?" repeated Madison, moving closer to him. "I prefer to think of it as finally free. Free from guilt, free from fear, free from the feeling that I don't deserve to be loved. And I'm free from the paranoia that everyone I love will leave me," said Ethan, softly kissing her lips. "Free from the feeling that I'm too toxic to deserve happiness." They kissed there in the garden, surrounded by the perfume of the roses Valerie had planted years before, with the sound of the children laughing in the distance and the autumn sun warming their faces. It was a kiss that sealed not a business agreement, but a promise of lasting love built on truth, acceptance, and the courage to believe that wounded people can heal together. When they separated, Madison took a deep breath, using her synesthesia to map all the emotional smells around her. There was happiness coming from the children, maternal satisfaction coming from Mrs. Carter in the kitchen and emanating from Ethan, the complex and wonderful smell of mature love, wet earth with jasmine, with notes of security, commitment, and a future full of possibilities. "You know what amazes me most," she said, nestling against his chest. "What?" "For the first time in 3 years, when I breathe deeply, I don't smell smoke. I don't smell death or guilt. I only smell home." Ethan hugged her tighter, burying his face in her hair that now was worn loose most days, cascading down her back as she had always wanted to wear it when she was younger. "And how does home smell?" he asked. Madison closed her eyes and smiled. "It smells like breakfast being prepared, like children's laughter, like old books in the library, like you turning to look for me during sleep." She paused, then added softly, "It smells like love that survived grief." They remained embracing while the sun began to set, painting the sky in pink and golden tones. Somewhere in the house, Claire and Lucas were making elaborate plans for their parents' wedding. Mrs. Carter was preparing dinner, and the world continued to turn around them in a perfectly normal way. But for Madison Scott Harrison, a woman who had lost everything and found even more than she had dreamed possible, that moment represented something extraordinary. Proof that true love wasn't just a fairy tale story, but a conscious and daily choice to build something beautiful on the ruins of what had been lost. And for the first time in her life, she completely believed that she deserved all that happiness, and that she had enough strength to protect it and make it last forever. The smell of love that survives grief, she discovered, was exactly the same as the smell of new beginnings, wet earth after the storm, ready for new flowers to bloom.